Matilda Parker stopped at the gate before she realized she had stopped walking. The iron creaked softly in the wind, a sound too loud for a place where people preferred not to be noticed. Beyond the fence, the land stretched wide and bare, unforgiving in its honesty. That was when she saw him. A man stepped out from between the outbuildings, moving with the unhurried certainty of someone who knew every inch of the ground beneath his boots. Tall, broad-shouldered, his hat low, his face half in shadow. Isaac Keaton. The name carried weight in town. Half-Apache, former scout, 3 wives gone. People spoke it quickly, never kindly, as if the words themselves might stain the tongue. Matilda had heard it all before she ever saw him. Matilda felt the weight of her own situation settle in her chest. No classroom, no children, no invitation to stay. Just a satchel of books and a decision that had led her here. She was here because every other door had already closed. If this gate remained closed, there would be nowhere else to go. Before we continue, if you've ever arrived somewhere with nothing but purpose and doubt, this story may feel familiar. Stay with us as it unfolds. Like, subscribe, share your thoughts, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support matters more than you know. The San Pedro Valley. In the early 1870s was a place that lived between endings and beginnings. The war back east had been declared over. But in this part of the territory, peace had not yet learned how to stay. Small patrols still passed through the valley roads. Stories of skirmishes and reprisals traveled faster than supplies. Law existed, but it bent easily in the hands of men who owned land, cattle, or influence. Children were expected to work, not to learn, and anything that threatened the fragile balance of survival was treated with suspicion. Matilda Parker had arrived in this valley believing she understood hardship. She had taught in drafty rooms in the east, where winter crept through cracked windows and discipline mattered more than comfort. But this was different. Here, hardship was not an inconvenience. It was the rule by which people measured worth. She had come with letters of introduction and a satchel heavy with books, convinced that the idea of schooling would speak for itself. It had not. Doors had closed politely. Smiles had faded quickly. Parents listened, nodded, and then explained that their children were needed elsewhere, on the land, in the barns, beside younger siblings. No one argued with her. No one insulted her. They simply declined to trust her. Each rejection pressed heavier than the one before. Matilda did not doubt her ability to teach, but she felt herself becoming invisible. A woman alone, unmarried, without a church or family behind her, was easily dismissed. By the time she heard Isaac Keaton's name spoken, she understood what it meant. It was not a recommendation. It was a final option. From the edge of the property, Matilda studied the ranch again. It was built with function in mind, low buildings, wide space, no unnecessary ornament. The land bore the marks of work rather than comfort. This was not a place made to welcome strangers. And yet, she felt a strange pull toward it. The man she had seen by the barn moved with restraint, his posture shaped by long habit rather than ease, even at a distance. Matilda sensed that he was someone who had learned to stay alert, someone who expected trouble before it arrived. The town's stories echoed in her mind: 3 wives gone, a past in the army, blood that made people uneasy. She did not know which parts were true. She only knew that fear had a way of attaching itself to names until it sounded like fact. Matilda adjusted her grip on the satchel, She had not come to judge him. She had come because every other path had closed. If she turned back now, she would leave the valley having changed nothing. No children would read their own names. No one would remember that she had tried. Standing there, dust settling around her boots, Matilda understood that asking for permission was no longer enough. She would have to ask for space instead and accept whatever answer came. Isaac Keaton noticed her at the gate. It was the stillness that drew his attention, not the sound. People who came to his land usually announced themselves, called out, waved, lingered at a distance, as if unsure whether to advance or retreat. This woman did neither. She stood quietly, one hand resting on the wooden post, the other holding a satchel that looked heavier than it should have been. Isaac straightened slowly. Years of scouting had taught him that haste invited mistakes. He took a few steps out from the barn, far enough that she could see him clearly, but not so close that the distance between them disappeared. Up close, she did not look like the kind of woman the town liked. Her dress was plain, worn for travel rather than display. Her hair was pinned back with care, not vanity. And there was no one with her, no wagon, no escort. That, more than anything else, put him on guard. He waited for her to speak first. When she did, her voice was steady. Mr. Keaton. The way she said his name told him she had heard it before. He nodded once.
What do you want?
It was not a polite question, but it was an honest one. Isaac had learned that politeness often hid expectations. He had no intention of meeting. My name is Matilda Parker, she said. I'm a teacher. The word landed between them and stayed there. Isaac's expression did not change, but his thoughts did. A teacher. That explained the satchel. It did not explain why she was here. I'm not looking for work, he said, and I'm not interested in lessons. I didn't come for either, Matilda replied.
I came to ask for permission.
That surprised him enough to make him look at her more carefully. Permission usually came dressed as demand, for what he asked. To use one of your buildings, she said. A few hours a week. To teach children how to read and write. The words were simple. The request was not. Isaac let out a breath through his nose. So that was it. Another woman chasing an idea. Another plan that would turn into disappointment once the valley showed its teeth. He had seen it before. Ambition softened by isolation. Confidence worn down by rumor and stares. You won't find children here, he said. And if you do, they won't last. I know, Matilda said. He studied her face for signs of pleading, for the careful tilt of someone trying to win sympathy. He found none. They've already told you about me, Isaac said. It was not a question. Yes, she answered, just as plainly. They told me you live far from town, that you don't keep company, that people don't stay, and you came anyway. I did, for a moment. Neither of them spoke. Wind moved through the tall grass beyond the fence. Isaac felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the instinct to end the conversation before it drew a line he did not want crossed. Why, he asked finally. Matilda did not answer right away. When she did, it was with care, because every other door closed before I reached it, and because children live beyond town limits, whether people want to admit it or not. Isaac glanced toward the empty stretch of land behind her. He thought of the families scattered across the valley, of boys who learned numbers by counting cattle, and girls who learned letters only by watching names scratched onto crates. He also thought of the trouble this would bring. Talk. Attention. The kind of attention that never stayed small. "If I say no," he said, "you'll move on." "Yes." "And if I say yes," he continued, "people will talk. They already do," Matilda said, simply stating a fact. That earned a flicker of something in his eyes, recognition, perhaps, or warning. "You can use the old storage shed," Isaac said at last. "It's dry. That's all I'll promise." Matilda expected nothing more. That's enough. She did not thank him, but a faint smile touched her lips. She simply adjusted the satchel on her shoulder, the way someone did when they were already planning what came next. As she turned to leave, Isaac felt a quiet, unsettling thought settle in his mind. She had not asked to stay, and that, somehow, made the risk feel greater than any request for shelter ever could. The first morning of lessons arrived without ceremony. Matilda woke before dawn in the small room she had rented at the edge of town, the air already cool despite the promise of heat later in the day. She dressed quietly, smoothing her skirt as if the act itself could steady her thoughts. Then packed her satchel with the same care she once used back east, chalk wrapped in cloth, a slate board, a few thin readers whose pages had softened with use. None of it felt sufficient. It never did. By the time she reached Isaac Keaton's ranch, the sun was only just lifting itself over the hills. The storage shed stood exactly as she remembered it, plain, weathered, its door creaking slightly when she pushed it open. Dust coated the floor. Light filtered through the cracks in the boards. It was not a classroom. It was shelter. And for now, that would have to be enough. She waited. For a long while, nothing happened. Matilda stood with her hands folded, listening to the sounds of the ranch waking around her, the lowing of cattle, the distant thud of a gate closing, the scrape of a shovel against earth. Isaac passed once at a distance, carrying a bucket, his attention fixed on his work. He did not look toward the shed. She wondered if he expected the same thing she did: no children, no noise, no proof that this effort would amount to anything. Then she heard footsteps. A boy appeared first, barefoot, his trousers rolled up to the knee. He hovered at the door as if ready to bolt. Behind him came a younger girl clutching a rag doll. And then another boy, older, with eyes sharp from responsibility he had not chosen. 3 children, no more. Matilda did not greet them with speeches. She did not ask why they had come or how long they would stay. She simply knelt and wrote her name on the slate. "This is my name," she said. "If you're here, you'll learn to write yours." They stared at the chalk marks as if she had drawn something alive. By the end of the first hour, 1 child had left. By the end of the second, another had grown restless. Only the barefoot boy remained, carefully scratching letters into the slate with the kind of concentration usually reserved for dangerous tasks. When the lesson ended, he did not thank her. He did not say goodbye. He only looked once more at his name before running off toward the fields. Matilda sat alone again, her hands resting in her lap. She told herself that 3 was a beginning. Over the next few days, the pattern repeated. Some mornings brought 4 children, some only 1, some none at all. Parents lingered at a distance, watching with folded arms, ready to call their children away at the first sign of trouble. Matilda adapted without complaint. When the heat grew unbearable, she shortened lessons. When work demanded attention elsewhere, she let children go without guilt. She learned quickly that survival here came before schedules. What surprised her most was Isaac. He never interfered. He never questioned her methods. But she began to notice small changes. The floor of the shed was swept clean one morning. A rough bench appeared along the wall. When a storm passed through and rain threatened to soak the books, Isaac quietly fixed the roof before she arrived the next day. He never mentioned any of it. From her place at the front of the shed, Matilda found herself watching him in the margins of her vision. The way he moved across the land suggested a man accustomed to listening to the wind, to the ground, to things unseen. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried weight, shaped by experience rather than habit. One afternoon, after the children had gone, Matilda stayed behind to reorder the slates. Isaac approached the door and stopped him short, as if unsure whether to cross the threshold. "They won't come every day," he said. "I know," she replied. "They'll be needed elsewhere. I know that too." He nodded once, relieved perhaps that she did not argue. Silence settled between them, not awkward, but unfilled. "You don't teach like they expected," he said after a moment. Matilda looked up. "How did they expect more talking?" he said. "Less watching." She smiled faintly. "Children learn by watching first." That earned her a glance brief, thoughtful. "That's true," he said. As the weeks passed, the shed became something more than borrowed space. Children learned to write their names, then simple words. They practiced numbers by counting fence posts, by tallying sacks of feed. Matilda did not separate lessons from life. She could not afford to. Every concept had to earn its place. But the more the class settled, the louder the whispers grew. Matilda heard them first in half-finished sentences, in the way conversations paused when she passed. She learned that concern had replaced curiosity. People spoke of the children spending time near Isaac Keaton, of a woman who did not understand what kind of man he was. Someone said the lessons were only an excuse. Someone else wondered aloud what was really being taught. She kept these words from Isaac at first, telling herself that fear did not need feeding, that if she moved forward quietly enough, the noise would die down, but it didn't. One afternoon, a mother appeared without warning, her face drawn tight with anger. She yanked her son from the bench and accused Matilda of squandering his time, of filling his mind with ideas that were never meant for him. The boy said nothing, his gaze locked on the floor. After they left, the shed seemed to shrink around her. That night, Matilda lay awake. By morning, her decision was made. She waited until Isaac finished his work for the day, then met him near the corral. She did not soften her words.
"I should leave. This was a mistake,"
she said. He looked at her, startled. "Because of them, because of the children," she corrected. "They're becoming a reason to target you." Isaac felt the old reflex rise, the instinct to agree, to step back, to let distance do its work. It would be easier that way, quieter. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "I'm not talking about owing," Matilda replied. "I'm talking about consequences." He studied the ground between them, then looked up again. "They push the others out like this," he said quietly. "Same way. Talk first, pressure after." Matilda frowned. "Others?" "My wives," he said. The word was flat, stripped of drama. "When it got hard, they left. I didn't stop them." "And now?" she asked. Isaac met her gaze. "Now I'm thinking you are letting them decide for you what is wrong." The admission surprised them both. Matilda felt something shift, not relief, but recognition. He was not offering protection. He was offering a choice. I didn't come here to disappear, she said slowly. Then don't, Isaac replied. The next morning, the children returned, fewer than before, but enough. When Mortimer Crane's name began circulating alongside the rumors, Matilda understood that the valley's unease had found a voice. Crane was spoken of as a man of principle, a protector of order. He visited parents, asked careful questions, expressed concern for safety. The rumors did not arrive all at once. They settled in slowly, like dust after a long ride, coating everything until it was impossible to tell what had once been clean. Matilda noticed the change in small ways at first. A child who had always come early now lingered at the edge of the yard before turning back. A mother, who once watched lessons from a distance, no longer appeared at all. Conversations in town stopped more abruptly when Matilda entered a room, as though her presence required caution. She had lived long enough among people to recognize the pattern. This was no longer curiosity. It was concern shaped into something sharper. 2 days later, as the class gathered, a wagon rolled up the drive. The horses were well fed, their tack clean. The man who stepped down wore his authority the way others wore coats, easily, with practice. Mortimer Crane smiled as if he were arriving at a social call. Behind him, Sheriff Marcus Feldman dismounted more carefully, his expression already tight with calculation. Isaac felt the shift before either man spoke. The children sensed it too. Voices fell quiet. Matilda stepped forward, instinctively placing herself between the class and the visitors. "Good morning," Crane said. "We're here to check on a concern." "A concern?" Matilda asked. Crane's smile widened. "We've heard troubling things about this gathering." Isaac said nothing. He knew better than to feed the performance. Sheriff Feldman cleared his throat. "There have been complaints," he said, "about children being kept from their work, about improper instruction." "Improper," Matilda repeated. Crane clasped his hands. "No one is accusing," he said smoothly. "We're simply being careful. These are uncertain times." Matilda felt the heat rise in her chest. "You're welcome to observe," she said. "You'll see exactly what we do." Crane glanced into the shed, his gaze passing over the benches, the chalk marks, the children's tense faces. "That won't be necessary today," he replied. "For now, we'll need Mr. Keaton to come into town. There are questions." Isaac met Matilda's eyes. He could see the decision forming there, sharp and immediate. "I'll go," he said. "No," she said quietly. "I will." Crane raised a brow. "This isn't your matter, Miss Parker." "It is," she answered. "You made it so." The sheriff shifted, uncomfortable. "Let's keep this orderly," he said. "Mr. Keaton will come with us. Miss Parker can follow if she wishes." The children watched in silence as Isaac stepped forward. He paused only long enough to look at Matilda. "You don't have to," he said. She held his gaze. "I know." As the wagon turned toward town, Matilda locked the shed behind her. She did not know what would happen next. She only knew that leaving now would teach the wrong lesson to the children, to the town, and to herself. For the first time since she had arrived in the valley, Matilda Parker did not feel like a visitor waiting for permission. The town gathered the way it always did when something threatened to disturb its habits slowly at first. Then all at once, by the time the wagon carrying Isaac Keaton rolled to a stop near the courthouse, people had already begun to line the edges of the street, leaning against posts, standing in doorways, pretending coincidence. Matilda walked behind the wagon, her pace measured, her hands steady despite the tightness in her chest. She noticed details she had not allowed herself to see before, the way conversations fell silent as Isaac passed, the way eyes lingered on his back, weighing him against stories they preferred to facts. It was easier, she understood, to believe a rumor than to face the discomfort of being wrong. Inside the courthouse, the air was heavy and stale. Sheriff Marcus Feldman took his place near the desk, removing his hat and setting it down with care. Mortimer Crane stood apart, his posture relaxed, his expression concerned in a way that suggested he had already decided what was best for everyone present. "This is informal," the sheriff said, addressing the room. "No charges, just questions." Isaac nodded once. He did not sit. Matilda remained near the doorway, aware that her presence alone irritated Crane. That, more than anything else, told her how necessary it was. Crane spoke first. "We've received complaints," he said, his voice smooth, "about children being taken from their duties, about instruction that may not align with community values." "And what values are those?" Matilda asked. Crane turned to her, surprise flickering across his features before settling back into practiced patience. "Safety," he replied. "Stability. We can't afford disruption." "Miss Parker, teaching children to read is disruption," she pressed. Crane smiled thinly. "In times like these, anything unfamiliar can be." Isaac finally spoke. "If you have something to say about my land, say it." The sheriff shifted. "Mr. Keaton, there are concerns about whether your property is appropriate for this sort of activity. Given your past—" "My past?" Isaac asked quietly. Feldman hesitated. "Your time as a scout, your associations." Matilda felt the familiar burn of anger, but she kept her voice level. "His service was to this territory," she said. "If you doubt that, the Army records will confirm it." Crane raised a hand. "No one doubts his service," he said quickly. "We're simply asking whether this arrangement is wise." "Wise for whom?" Matilda asked. The question landed harder than she expected. A murmur moved through the room. Crane glanced toward the sheriff, then back at her. "For the children," he said. Matilda stepped forward then, fully into the center of the room. She did not raise her voice. She did not gesture broadly. She spoke the way she did in the shed, clearly, deliberately, trusting that clarity could carry its own weight. "Before I arrived," she said, "no one here was asking whether children could read contracts or count their wages. No one was concerned that they might be cheated or misled. Those questions only appeared when learning did." A man near the back shifted uncomfortably. A woman lowered her eyes. "I did not take children from their families." Matilda continued. "They came when they could. They left when they needed to. Nothing was forced. Nothing was hidden." Crane opened his mouth, but she did not stop. "If you are truly worried about harm," she said, "then point to it. Name the child who has suffered. Show me where knowledge has made them less capable, less safe." Silence followed. It stretched, thin and exposed. Sheriff Feldman cleared his throat. "Miss Parker," he said, "even if your intentions are good, the town has a right to what?" she asked gently. "To fear what it doesn't control." The sheriff looked at Isaac, then back at Matilda. He was not an unkind man. He was simply accustomed to choosing the path that kept the least people angry. "We can't allow things to escalate," he said. "For now. The class should be suspended." "No," Matilda replied. The word was soft, but it held. Crane's eyes sharpened. You don't have the authority to refuse. I do, she said, because this is not a public institution. It is private instruction on private land. If you wish to stop it, you will need more than concern. She reached into her satchel and withdrew a folded paper. These are attendance records, she said, setting them on the desk. Names, hours, notes from parents who allowed their children to come. Crane stared at the paper as if it had offended him. You've prepared for this, he said. I prepare for my students, Matilda answered. Isaac watched her with something like disbelief. He had never seen anyone stand in this room and refuse to bend. The sheriff studied the paper, then sighed. This doesn't end the matter, he said, but it does delay it. Crane's jaw tightened. Delay favors disorder, he said. Delay favors truth. Matilda replied. For a moment. It seemed Crane might press further. Then he smiled again, the expression brittle now. Very well, he said. We'll revisit this. When they left the courthouse, the street parted slowly. No one cheered, no one apologized, but no one spoke either. Isaac walked beside Matilda in silence until they reached the edge of town. Then he stopped. You didn't have to do that, he said. Yes, she replied, turning to face him. I did. He searched her face, looking for doubt, for fear, for the beginning of regret. He found none. They'll come back, he said. They won't stop. I know. Isaac let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. You could still leave. Matilda shook her head. Not now. They walked the rest of the way back to the ranch without speaking. By the time they reached the shed, the sun was low, painting the valley in long shadows. The days after the hearing did not bring relief. They brought watchfulness. Matilda felt it in the way people paused when she passed in town, in the way conversations bent around her presence and resumed only after she had gone. The class continued, but quietly now. Children arrived in smaller numbers, often in pairs, as if courage needed company. Some stayed only long enough to copy a lesson before hurrying home. Others lingered, reluctant to leave the one place where no one spoke to them as if they were temporary. Matilda adjusted again. She shortened lessons. She kept her voice low. She learned to read faces as carefully as she read words. Teaching had never been only about letters. It was about knowing when to press and when to wait. Isaac changed, too. He did not say it aloud, but the ranch no longer felt like a place he guarded alone. He rose earlier, not because the work demanded it, but because the shed lighted up at dawn now. And he found himself measuring his mornings by that quiet glow. He listened for the sound of children's footsteps as he worked the corrals. When they did not come, the silence felt heavier than before. At night, they spoke more. They spoke of practical things at first, fences that needed replacing, water lines that froze too easily, the way the wind shifted before storms. But beneath the ordinary words, something deeper took shape. They learned the rhythm of each other's thinking. Isaac learned when Matilda went quiet because she was tired, and when she went quiet because something mattered. Matilda learned the difference between Isaac's silence when he was retreating and his silence when he was choosing his words with care. One evening, as the fire burned low, Matilda asked the question she had been holding back. Why did you let the others leave so easily? Isaac did not answer right away. He stared into the flames, his jaw tight. Because I believed it was kinder, he said at last. If I asked them to stay, they would have to admit they didn't belong. And you, Matilda asked. He exhaled slowly. I decided I didn't belong anywhere. Matilda felt the truth of that settle into her chest like a stone. She reached for his hand without thinking. He stiffened at first, then let his fingers close around hers, careful, uncertain, as if touch were something that could still surprise him. "You belong here," she said quietly, "because you've learned how to accept others." Isaac looked at her then. A subtle change passed over his face. Spring followed slowly. With it came whispers that had lost some of their edge. The town did not apologize nor welcome her, but it did not interfere either. Sheriff Feldman passed the ranch once and nodded, his expression unreadable. Mortimer Crane did not return. Children who had stayed away from the class drifted back, bringing siblings. The benches filled. Names written once in dirt were written again, this time on paper. Matilda watched a boy read a sentence aloud without stumbling and felt tears sting her eyes before she could stop them. It was weeks later, after a long day that ended with shared exhaustion rather than triumph, that Isaac finally spoke the thought he had been carrying. They sat on the porch. The valley stretched out before them in dusk. The wind moved gently now, no longer sharp with warning. Isaac turned his hat in his hands, a habit he had never quite broken. "I need to say something," he began. Matilda waited. She had learned that rushing him only pushed the moment away. "I've been married before," he said. "You know that. Each time, I believed the mistake was mine for wanting more than I could give." She said nothing, but her attention did not waver. "They came because the land promised something," he continued. "Security, change, a story they could step into. When the story turned hard, they left. I let them." He looked at her now. "You didn't come for the land." "No," Matilda said softly. "You came for the children." "Yes." Isaac swallowed. "That's why this is different." Matilda felt her breath catch, but she did not interrupt. "If we marry," he said, "you'll lose your standing with the school authorities back east. They won't recognize your work here. You know that." "I do. I can't give you a town that respects you," he went on. "I can't promise this valley will ever be kind. What I can promise is space, protection of what matters. This land, this shed, your classroom, it can be yours to shape." He turned fully toward her then, his voice steady but unguarded. "I want you to stay, because you choose this place, and me." The silence that followed was deep and unafraid. Matilda looked out at the valley she had once crossed with doubt heavy in her chest. She thought of the closed doors, the whispered warnings, the first child who had traced their name in dirt. She thought of the man beside her, who had learned to step back so often he had nearly disappeared. "I never wanted a life that fit easily," she said. "I wanted a life that mattered." She turned to him. "If we marry, I want the work to continue. I want the children to keep coming. I want this place to stand for something more than survival." Isaac's eyes softened. "Then we'll build it that way." She smiled then, not brightly, not like a girl promised comfort, but with the quiet certainty of someone choosing her future with clear eyes. "Yes," she said, "I'll marry you." They did not celebrate loudly. There was no rush to announce it to the valley. They shared the knowledge like a kept flame, something to tend before showing to the wind. When word finally spread, it traveled differently than rumor had before, slower, heavier, with less hunger. The wedding itself was simple. A visiting priest, a handful of witnesses, children standing barefoot near the shed they now called their school. Matilda wore a plain dress, altered by her own hands. Isaac stood straighter than she had ever seen him. When they spoke their vows, there was no flourish, only truth. That night, the valley settled into its familiar quiet. But inside the ranch house, a different stillness took hold, one that did not echo. As Matilda extinguished the last lamp in the shed, she paused, listening to the absence of fear in her chest. She realized then that love had not arrived as rescue or fire. It had arrived as partnership, as choice, as the steady presence of someone willing to stand beside her when the world pressed in. In the end, this story is not about changing a town or silencing its fears. It is about choosing to stand when leaving would be easier. Matilda Parker does not come west to be admired, nor does Isaac Keaton seek redemption in her presence. What binds them is not rescue, but recognition. Each sees in the other a quiet refusal to live according to the limits imposed by rumor, blood, or convenience. Their bond grows not from comfort, but from shared responsibility and earned trust. The story reminds us that education is not merely the transfer of knowledge, but an act of courage. To teach in a place shaped by fear is to challenge that fear without shouting. To love in such a place is to risk being misunderstood, and to accept that understanding may never arrive. Isaac's past and Matilda's calling do not disappear when they choose one another. Instead, they are honored and carried forward. The lesson is clear. Belonging is not granted by a crowd, but built through daily commitment, in a world that often rewards silence and retreat. This story affirms a quieter truth. Some lives are changed not by conquest or defiance, but by persistence. And sometimes, the most meaningful victories are the ones that simply endure.